Hi folks, it's Chet from Tag Along with Chet. Well, I just got into my hangar and I thought it was time to do another Hangar Talk session. So this will be, I guess, episode 2. So come on with me in the office and we'll have a little chat. Well, I guess the first thing we better do out here is get some heat in this place. It's only 0 degrees or centigrade or 32 Fahrenheit, and so I guess we better get some heat in here. So hang on just a sec. There's my heater, and we'll get that lit up. Okay, got the stove going here, so it'll probably take about another 5 or so minutes for this to heat up to a comfortable level. It's kind of hard to talk with this thing hissing in the background, so I usually turn it off when I do my little chit-chat with you folks. So this is what it looks like. So I guess what we're going to do now is just get some coffee ready as well. I think it got a little cold in there. There's a little bit of ice in the plumbing, but it seems to be percolating now, so that's good. Got my coffee poured. And so I guess we'll continue on from where we left off. So this is the second episode from Hangar Talk. I was going to call it Chat with Chet, but I don't know, Hangar Talk, I don't know. Anyway, that's what I was going to call it, but we'll just maintain Hangar Chat or Hangar Talk. Now I got myself confused. Anyway, where we left off last week, I guess it was last week, I can't remember. I think I sort of wrapped it up by giving you some indication when I started and how many logbooks I got and so forth. But anyway, like I was saying, I think something to the effect of I was being transferred to the airport. That's what it was. So I left downtown after about 18 months. I think it was almost 18. Yeah, it was exactly 18 months because they had a freeze on the department, so you couldn't transfer. So anyway, I ended up moving to the airport after 18 months and did just about everything I could out there to get into all the operational aspects of whatever they were offering. So it started off as the normal, you know, the ticket counter stuff and talking to people, you know, checking them in and selling tickets and doing cash and oh God, I can't remember what all that stuff never really interested me until finally, I think it was probably about a year after I was there and I'd done everything else from working customs to doing departure room and so forth. I finally managed to get a position where I was working in operations. Now in operations, what you ended up doing was you would do the load sheets. Now that really turned my crank, I'll tell you, because I just thought that was the best job on the airport, was doing the load sheets and working ramp in conjunction with the operations. That was part of the operational end of it that I liked. And in those days in Toronto, we had international flights as well as domestic. Now the domestic flights weren't that many because I think we only had one that I can remember, and it used to be Flight 1. It was a DC-8 at that time, and it operated from Toronto to Montreal. No, Montreal to Toronto, and then Toronto on to Vancouver. That was known as Flight 1. And I think it was some years later that we finally managed to get another transcontinental flight. It was Flight 3. Flight 1, after quite a few years, became actually a 747, which was which was quite a few years later after we got the Boeing 747, the 200 series. So load sheets was my billywag. I enjoyed doing that, and radio work, it all had to do with airplanes, and the crew at times would come in and chat with you, and you got to know them, and at that point in time, that's actually where I became a little bit more interested in the flying aspect of it. I got to know a lot of the crew members that went through, and yeah, it was always like, well, Chet, once you get your license and everything like that, give me a call and we'll see what we can do to get you in for an interview, yada, yada, yada. And those old-time guys, they're long gone now. Some of the names I still remember, but anyway, it got my interest up. So I thought I was going to sort of escalate or try to get the flying end of it out of the way by doing it faster. And so what I did one time, I went into Hamilton and I went to the Air Force recruitment office. And I sat in the Air Force recruitment office, and I said to the guy, well, this is what I want to do. And he said to me, well, he says, do you wear those glasses? I had glasses, of course, and I said, yeah. He says, do you wear them all the time? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, he said, to become flight crew, he said, you can't wear glasses. They were pretty strict on that. So I said, oh, geez, you know. He said, but, you know, there's lots of other jobs on the operational type jobs, you know, ground-based. So why don't you just go in and get the exam out of the way and see where that puts you? So I said, okay, fine. So I went in and sat down with a bunch of other guys, and I started writing this test. And it really was more of an aptitude type thing to see, I guess, how you thought. And I don't know, it was one of those number type things. And anyway, I'm going through this thing, and it wasn't a big deal. I started working on that, and I got about halfway through it, and I said to myself, now, why am I doing this? You know, I mean, I've already got a job with the airline, and I won't be able to get in with the Air Force anyway because, you know, I got these damn glasses. So I kind of just dropped everything. I said the heck with it. And anyway, then there was a time limited type thing on this test. So I stopped, and I got about halfway through this thing. And then finally, the guy said, okay, time's up, and all the tests were collected, and then you had to wait and have this sort of an interview with one of the, I don't know, he was some bigwig in the Air Force out there that was sitting there in the recruitment office with a uniform on. And anyway, my turn came, and I sat in there, and he said, well, Chet, he says, look, he said, I've got your test here. And he said, and what you've got here, he says, you've got, you know, you did well. He said, but how come you only got 50% of it done? And I said, well, and I explained to him the reason why. And I said, you know, I just couldn't see myself going through all of this stuff and then finding out that I was going to get a ground-based type job, and I don't want that. Yeah, he says, unfortunately, he says, the medicals are pretty strict, and he says, if you don't have perfect eyesight, you're not going to get into the flying end of it or anything. And I said, not even a navigator or a flight engineer or anything? He said, no, you won't get through that cockpit door. So I said, okay, well, that sort of made me feel a little, well, yeah, I kind of felt bad about that. So, but anyway, I thought, well, I worked with the airline, maybe we'll keep on trucking. So anyway, I finally got my private pilot's license. It took me, I don't know, about 5 months, I think it was. And I ended up getting my private pilot's license. I think there's about maybe 4 pages. And I wasn't the brightest pilot type thing. In those days, I think they tried to suck you out of every cent they could anyway. But anyway, after about, I don't know, 13, 14 hours, I ended up soloing. And then I had to do the required amount of flying, which in those days I think was about 40 hours, I think it was. And I think I had 44 hours, I think it was, something like that, when I got my license. So I did my private pilot's flight test, and I think I had to do a few more little things to add up the hours. And then I think it was actually in December, I got my my private pilots. Now, I don't know if you folks remember, and the old guys do, but in those days, if you had a private pilot's license and you paid, in my particular case, wasn't much. I think I don't know. I can't remember. Maybe $400 or $500 I paid for the whole course. But after you finished and you got your private pilot's license, the government would rebate you $100 because you were now a prime candidate in case they required your services in the armed forces. So they paid you $100 back from the government. And I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, I finally ended up like I said, with the private pilot's license, and then I went on later on. I think it was, yeah, it says January '68 here. I started off on the Cessna 150, which I thought, wow, hey, this is something else now. It had a lot of more instruments in it than the Tri-Champ did. And then finally I ended up on the 172 after getting checked out on the 150, and on it went. Anyway, getting back to the airport where I was working at that time, a vacancy came up in Vancouver, and it was for an assistant flight dispatcher. And I thought, wow, I don't know, what do these guys do? And I'd been through all the departments at the airport by that time. So I thought, well, I'll apply for it because it looked like something I wanted to get into. It tweaked my interest. And so I applied. Well, I didn't get the first position. I think I got the second or the third one because they were really expanding. We got more airplanes, and they needed more dispatchers, assistant dispatchers, this type of thing in Vancouver, where we had our head office for operations. So off to Vancouver I went. So I got in my little Volkswagen. I remember it was a 1968. Yeah, it was only about a year old because I had a nice little demo Volkswagen that I bought in Burlington, and I remember it was a nice red color, and I bombed off to Vancouver with that. And I can remember going down through I guess at that time it was called either George Massey Tunnel or the Dees Tunnel, I can't remember, but anyway, I was going through there, and as I was going northbound on Highway 99 out there, I saw this huge, massive orange DC-8. It was a DC-8 63 series, and it was our airplane, and it was landing. And I thought, geez, there's the airports over there. And anyway, I just kept on going down the highway, and bang! About 10 minutes later, another big DC-8 came flying by out there. Well, by the time I got to the turnoff, just before I guess it was the Oak Street Bridge out there, I must have seen the 3 or 4 of these things come over, and I thought, holy cow, are we ever a busy carrier? I never realized that we were so large. Well, what it turned out to be, it was actually a DC-8 of ours, which was doing pilot training, and it was doing touch and goes at Vancouver Airport. So it was just one airplane that was doing the touch and goes. And of course, in those days, pilot training was usually all done, to get checked out on it. You actually went on the airplane and got checked out on it with a check captain, and there was probably 3 or 4 other guys sitting in the back out there waiting for their turn to do so many touch and goes to get qualified on the airplane. After they'd done their ground course and stuff like that, because in those days simulators were there. Now we had a DC-8 simulator, but it was a fixed simulator. I remember being in it and getting a little bit of time on it, but anyway, another story. I ended up going to Vancouver, and I became an assistant dispatcher out there. In July '68. I went to Langley. I got checked out in the 172, and that was in July. And of all things, the registration of that aircraft was KGB, which I thought was kind of unique. Anyway, so I was in Vancouver in '68. I was in Vancouver for probably about 9 months. And then I took a position in Montreal, of all things. Now, for guys to transfer from Vancouver to Montreal was just unheard of. However, I had other interests. In Vancouver, it was being head office. You never really got to do the real thing. Like you did a lot of paperwork, I thought, as an assistant dispatcher at that time. So I ended up going to Montreal, and you had more hands-on out there. You did flight planning and you did weather briefings for the carriers that we had contracted with, like Olympic Airlines and KLM and I don't know, Monarch and some of those other aircraft charter outfits that went in there. Oh, Aero Mexico was another one, or Aero Novas de Mexico as it was called at that time. So anyway, I transferred to Montreal. And in Montreal, I learned a heck of a lot. I learned how to, number one, drink a lot at the pub, at the Dorval Tavern, I think it was called, where we visited quite regularly. And then there was Inn on the Green or something. It was another pub that was out there. And so I was in Montreal for all that time when they had the Laporte kidnapping, when we had martial law, when they had the worst snowstorm in history, I think, when they declared a disaster area, and I went to work on a skidoo. There was no cars. I couldn't find my car. It was buried under snow in a parking lot somewhere. Anyway, good times in Montreal. I learned some French. We could do conversational French out there, so I took French in high school, but anyway, this kind of put it all back. While in Montreal, purchased an airplane, and it was a Cessna 140, and the registration was CFDMJ, Delta Mike Juliet. So whoever's got that airplane now, I think it's up in Sept-Îles. So what I did is I used to fly the airplane quite a bit between Montreal and Burlington. So that was just south of Toronto. And my parents lived there, and my sisters, and I had a girlfriend down there. The airplane was based at was just a little grass strip, and it was on Ile Perrot. Now, I don't know, some of you viewers may know where Ile Perrot is, but it's just south of Montreal, near Lac Saint-Jean. And you'd have to go across a bridge from the Montreal area, and then you'd hang a left after you got to the bridge. It was on that highway that finally became the 401. It wasn't that far from the border, or the provincial border between Quebec and Ontario. Anyway, I used to whip in there, and I had the airplane. The airplane was actually there where I bought it. Was there when I bought it, and the farmer who owned the strip said, "Yeah, you can keep it here." And you know, there's the lawnmower. You just cut the lawn and you know, cut the runway. And I put little reflectors on the runway. It was a very short runway. And yeah, so anyway, that's where I had my Cessna 140. And I was up with the guy who owned it, who was an Air Canada guy, from what I can recall. And I was up with him for about 20 minutes, and he did all the takeoffs and landings, and basically I just watched and from the right seat. And anyway, then I got in the airplane a couple days later, and I took off, and off I went. And yeah, I don't know, it was a tail dragger, and time in a tail dragger. Anyway, bottom line is it worked. I got in and out of there. And of course I had some experiences with this airplane. Okay, just check my logbook here, and I took the airplane in 1971. I took it to Milton, or Burlington, I guess it was called. I can't remember. It was Burlington Air Park anyway, but it was in Milton, or just outside of Milton, between Milton and Burlington, on August the 25th, and I flew it from my little airport there on Ile Perrot, and I was the only airplane there. There was no other airplanes there at all, just me. And I flew it from there to Kingston, and from Kingston to Milton. That took me 5 hours to do that trip. And then from there, I left it in Burlington, Burlington Air Park, and I left it there until September the 11th. And I believe that was on a Saturday, again, 1971. You can check out these, what day it was, but I think it was a Saturday. And September the 11th, and I flew from Milton to Belleville to my base on Ile Perrot. And that took me 4 hours and 5 minutes airtime. Now, that sort of got a little bit of a story behind it, because when I left, it was kind of questionable. It was one of these drizzly type of days, and you know, how the heck I'm still here, I sometimes wonder. But anyway, I took off, and in those days, Toronto Island Airport really wasn't an issue. There was flights going in and out of there, but as long as you got around that area before 7 o'clock, there was no tower, there was nothing, and as long as you kept at a certain level over the lake, you didn't have to worry about Toronto ATC. And they at that time had 3 smokestacks there from a generating plant right on the lakeshore. I don't believe it's not there anymore. I know it's not there anymore, but it was always known as the stacks. You always reported by the stacks when you were coming in. Even I think on runway 32 or 33 or whatever it was in Toronto. But anyway, I didn't have to talk to Toronto at all. I just kept low enough and over the lakes and sort of on the lake side of Toronto Airport, Toronto Island Airport, and then I blasted off and kept on going. And as I was going out there, the cloud layer started coming down, and I started going up. And the next thing I knew, I was in between layers. And I thought, holy cow, this doesn't look good. So I kept on flying, and you know, and of course, no VOR. All I had was a compass and a radio, which was a VHT3 radio, which was one of those ones where you would you'd have a whistle tune thing on it, where it'd have a crystal in it, and you'd set the frequency on one, and you'd tune it with the other for the receiver, and once the whistle became a beep or something like that, you were coordinated between your transmitter and your receiver. So that's all I had. No VOR, no ADF, nothing. So I just flew on a compass heading, and I knew that it was that way. Anyway, then the sun started coming up in between layers, and I thought, well, that's good. It'll burn off this bottom layer, and I just kept on flying. And well, way in the distance, I saw something. I didn't know what the heck it was. It was weird looking. I'd never seen anything like this before. I thought, what the heck's that thing doing up here? And what it was the top of a microwave tower that was sticking up from the bottom layer into the layer that I was on top of. And I thought, holy cow. I mean, it kind of scared me. I kind of looked at it from the distance, and you don't expect to see anything like that up in the sky unless it's an airplane. You know, it just didn't look right. So anyway, and I couldn't see down. All I knew, there was a tower there. And then it dawned on me, I knew where this tower was, because I used to travel in my car between Montreal and Toronto or Burlington quite a bit. That was a big tower. There was actually right beside Highway 401. So I thought, oh, okay, now I know where I am, but man, I got to get down here. There's no way I'm going to be able to make it all the way up to Montreal in this kind of weather. So just at that time, all of a sudden, this airplane pops up through the overcast, that first layer, and it was a 172. And I thought, oh, this guy, obviously, he's got to be IFR, because, you know, I mean, what would a guy be doing up here unless he's IFR? Dumb old me, you know. But anyway, I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this guy. Well, there's no way you're going to be able to follow a 172 in a Cessna 140. So, but anyway, I started following him. Well, anyway, he was in a circuit, because he popped up through that overcast, and then he did a sort of a circuit, and then he went back down again. And I thought, geez, that's kind of weird, you know. And then bang, he just right into the cloud and gone. He was gone. So I saw where he sort of went down and took up that type of attitude and that approach, and I went down and I kind of followed him in, you might say. And I went through, I don't know, a layer of cloud anyway. You know, now you got to remember, this is Cessna 140, guys. You know, so I don't know how the heck I did it, but I managed to keep the thing right side up, and I really couldn't see anything. I swear to God, I couldn't see a damn thing. I was just on a nice right angle, and it was very calm, and a bit of drizzle still falling through in this cloud. And as I broke out, I remember seeing on my right side was this huge maple tree with a whole pile of leaves on it still. And this was, like I said, this was still in September, so you know, the leaves are still on, but it was a big green field right in front of me. And way down in the end, there was this 172, and he had landed, and he took the whole runway out there. He was taxiing, well, toward the end, because that's where the taxi strip was. And on each side, I can remember there were these bushel baskets. Now, bushel baskets are baskets about this big, you know, and they were painted red and white, and they had those on the side of the runway. And I saw that, oh, Jesus, it's an airport, you know. So I landed there. Well, it turned out to be Belleville. And I don't know if Belleville still exists. I've never looked it up again, but at that time it was a grass strip. And so I thought, well, that's good, you know. So I landed and I taxied in, and you know, they were all scratching their head and saying, geez, how'd that guy get here, you know? And I remember going into the little office out there, and without a word of a lie, and this is how well I remember this, on TV, there was a program, it was called Captain Kangaroo. So I sat there and watched this damn Captain Kangaroo program, which was a kid's program, for the next half hour or 45 minutes, and waiting for this weather to lift. So anyway, I finally got out of there, and I'll tell you something about that 172. The reason the 172 popped up, he was obviously quite experienced, more than I was, and he was actually scratching his head, and he asked me, how the hell did you get in here? And I said, well, blah, 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 and he kind of laughed. And anyway, I asked him, well, what were you doing up there? And he said, well, we do highway patrol on 401 for the Ontario Provincial Police to see if we can, you know, well, it was for catching speeders. So that's what he was up there for. And he said, I wanted to see how thick the layer was. So okay, fine. But anyway, that was one of my stories. Then later on, I took off, went out, bombed back up to Montreal to Ile Perrot, just in time to see a nice thunderstorm pass in front of me as I was landing. And it was pissing down rain. It was not nice. But anyway, that was one of my stories. Okay, well, that's about it, folks. I think I've blabbed on enough about one of my experiences out there. Not too bright, mind you, but I don't know how many hours I had at that time. Let me just double check here. I had probably a total of about 120 hours, I guess, if I look at my logbook here. And it just gets better. So yeah, I actually had no problem. If somebody gave me an airplane to say, well, here, fly this, I'd fly it. Tailwheel, tricycle, didn't matter. Later on, I got on skis. Not a problem. I don't know, I just did it. But obviously, things have changed quite a bit since I learned how to fly. I might also mention to you that I went through, I guess, a total of 4 instructors. Now, not that that was abnormal, because sometimes you went flying and the instructor you had was booked, and the only time you had was that particular day. So it had nothing to do with the fact that you always had the same instructor. It was always a different one. I think there was 4, and the best one I had was probably the youngest one, and he's still around. I won't mention any names because I had quite a few good lessons from him, which you can't do anymore. The stuff that they taught me then was stuff that you couldn't teach now in that format. But I got to take my hat off to him. He was quite good, and I learned a lot from him. Okay, we'll end it here, folks. Thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying these videos, hit that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to YouTube, to my channel, there's a subscribe button down the bottom, somewhere down there somewhere. Or is it over here? I'm looking at myself and I can't see what side it's on, but I think it's, anyway, it's on the bottom right when you're looking at your screen. And just click on that. There's also a little bell and just click on the bell as well after you subscribe, because it'll tell you when my next video is up and it'll send you a little notification. So yeah, I'd appreciate that. The more subscribers, the better it is for me. And it doesn't cost you folks anything. It's all freebies. So like I said, if you're enjoying these videos, by all means subscribe to my YouTube channel, Tag Along with Chet. And there are many videos that I've put together that are on my channel. So I'd appreciate it. Anyway, that's it, folks. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you the next time. Bye for now.